Welcome, everyone. We will get started in just a minute. Welcome, welcome. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. A few seconds. So welcome to Gray Associates Demand Trends webinar series, and thank you for joining us. We are discussing academic program evaluation for higher education. Each month, we share the latest trends and insights for academic program planning. We're pleased to have with us Bob Atkins, Gray's CEO, founder, and now a best-selling author. Allow me to share a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to as many of them as possible, and we can follow up with you offline if we do run out of time. You can also use the chat area for comments and discussions. Near the end of the webinar, we will have a pop-up quiz, survey, at the end of the session. Please do participate. Please give us your feedback. And without further ado, I will hand things off to Bob to get us started.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for joining me this month for our session. We'll share with you some trends in higher education and what's growing and what's not, both in terms of student demand and employment. And as part of that, we'll share one particular program. This month, we've chosen marketing management. So you can see the details on that and see the kind of information that we have and that we think you should include when you do program evaluation. So who is Gray? Well, we believe Gray is the first creator of a true program evaluation system. Folks have had pieces and parts of this, but I think we've put it together for the first time in a coherent way. And that's described in my book and here in this chart. So we believe there are four fundamental pieces of data you need. You need to understand your markets. You need to understand your margins. And I always say this, it's not because you're for-profit, but margins fund mission. So you need to know which programs are generating margin, which ones are consuming margin, so that you can make sure that stays in balance over time. Then you have to understand your academic standards and whether any given program is consistent with those academic standards. Are too many people getting DF and Ws? So that can be an issue. What is the makeup of the program in terms of demographics? And are you teaching it with enough full-time versus part-time faculty? So those are all issues with academic standards. And then finally, programs need to be aligned with the mission of the institution. And so that's obviously a qualitative factor, but very important in making program decisions. But the data is really not enough. In order to make good decisions, a true program evaluation system has to bring together the right people in a well-managed process that crisply gets to good decisions using sound data. So that's what we do. We've worked with, several hundred institutions at this point, well over 100 in the last year, to help them with these systems. Now, what I'm going to do today is share with you some data about what's going on at the bachelor's and master's level, specifically around markets. And I will say that if you're a community college, don't feel left out. We've actually developed a whole webinar for you. Most recent version ran a couple of days ago, but if you'd like to attend the community college version, please just let us know and we'll get you on the list and let you know when those are coming up. Gray does a couple of other things as well. Basically, building off the data we have, we help clients with pricing information, and particularly using discrete choice services surveys to optimize pricing. We do location analysis using all that information we have on competition, student demand, employment, to figure out where the best places are to add a campus, or more particularly from online, especially to market your programs. And then finally, we build financial planning models that simulate events and decisions and provide pro forma 10-year financials for higher education institutions that run all the way down to the number of courses you offer, individual course decisions about whether to launch them or not. And so it's both very high level, but it runs down to the kind of detail you need in order to really have a plan in higher education. Let's start out and see what's happening with student demand. When I do these presentations, the charts here are pretty easy to read. The dark bars are 2021, the light bars are 2022, and what we're looking for is light bars that are higher than dark bars. That is, the market is growing. As you can see, this month was a pretty good month. August was up 10%. And importantly, if you look here, you can see that we've been up every month for the last 6 months. So very good sign that things are bouncing back in higher education. Again, this is bachelor's and above. We look at what the biggest programs were. These are probably no surprise to many of you, but registered nursing topped the charts in terms of student interest. You'll notice later, by the way, it does not top the charts in terms of enrollment. And I believe, and the issue there is there are not enough seats for all the people that want to become nurses. Business administration and management, number 2, computer science, law, cybersecurity is now one of the most sought after programs. This really strikes me because only 5 years ago, this program really didn't even exist. So it's now one of the largest programs in the US in terms of student interest, and we'll talk about it again in terms of enrollment. Accounting, much more traditional programs, social work, criminal justice, human resources, and education, all amongst the top 10 in terms of student interest. What's growing fastest? Well, despite all the growth cybersecurity has had over the last few years, it's still the fastest growing program in terms of student interest, up 108% year over year in Google search volumes. Second is insurance, interestingly. Third is cinematography, film production. This has been on this list a little bit recently, so it's a consistent trend, but very surprising to me, actually. Data analytics, not surprising. Registered nursing, social work, all very big popular programs, still growing. Dance, a little bit surprising there. I didn't expect to see that. Marketing and marketing management, project management, and family practice nursing. I'm particularly interested in family practice nursing. I think there's a real opportunity here to combine that FNP program with psych. So you have a advanced nurse practitioner with a psych specialty. They can actually prescribe meds and help to relieve the traffic jam we have in dealing with mental health issues and getting people the kind of medication they need to treat those. Let's look at international student demand now. It too is up, and it's up quite sharply last month, up 28%. The performance recently has been mixed, pretty much in line with last year, but both July and August were up substantially. What are people interested in? Well, business is at the top of the list. And here you'll then see a bunch of STEM programs: computer science, engineering, data science, business analytics, computer software engineering. One of the things you should keep in mind is international students, when they're looking at the US, are very interested in STEM programs because they can get a better visa that gives them more time to find a job and stay in the US after graduation. So there's a bias there, if you will. In addition to those STEM programs, we have allied health. Let's see, marketing management, which we'll touch on again later, public health, and computer and information security. Now, where are those international inquiries coming from? Where is the opportunity if you want to go overseas and try and find students? Well, at first I should say is our data does not include China. We can't get behind the firewall to capture this information. So we start with India at the very top of the list and ahead by a fair stretch. What always surprises me is to see Nigeria as number 2. Just not a country I would have thought of as having the volume of potential students to come to the US that this would suggest. Iran, Bangladesh, Ghana, Pakistan, Nepal, the UK actually, Turkey and Ethiopia. So the UK always surprised me because I wouldn't expect students from there to be going overseas to get educated, but apparently they do. Now, where do those students want to go? Well, I have bad news for those of you who are in the middle of the country. By and large, they want to go to the coast, and particularly want to go to California. So it's got, I suppose, a good reputation out there for weather and fun, as well as good education system. Now, enrollment's a bit different. When we look at enrollment numbers, and here we're at the bachelor's level, it dropped pretty precipitously between 2020 and 2021. Mostly COVID stuff still going on. We're starting to see it bounce back now. Spring 2022 is up 0.4% over spring 2021. And then we look at masters, it's up a lot, both the last 2 years by 2%. So unlike much of the rest of the higher education industry, masters is still growing. Now, let's turn to the highest enrollment by program. Businesses at the top. Remember, in terms of student interest, registered nursing was number 1. Here it drifts all the way down to number 5 in terms of enrollment in nursing master's programs. Social work is number 2, computer science, business analytics. If we're looking at these, we've got a couple here in counseling, social work, school counseling, and counseling psychology. Then we got a few in education, general, educational leadership, and special ed. And then just a mixed bag of other things, as I mentioned, business, computer science, business analytics, and registered nursing. So those are the programs with the highest master's degree enrollment in the country. What's growing fastest? Data science at the master's level. Then we have a few things that are sort of general: sustainability studies, biostatistics, epidemiology, and advanced legal research. The rest is really tech, information technology, project management, computer science, human-computer interaction, business analytics, and information technology. So at the master's level, people are going back. The highest growth is in programs that will help them learn advanced analytical techniques. We'd switch now to look at bachelor's programs. And again, business tops the list. But number 2 is psychology, and we haven't seen that in any of the other data so far. So I find that interesting. It is one of the biggest programs in the United States, continues to be, not just this spring. Registered nursing is actually 3rd. Then we get to biology, a lot of folks in pre-med, computer science, the undecideds, general studies, criminal justice, mechanical engineering, accounting, and finance general. What's growing at the bachelor's level? Cyber and security is the hottest thing in terms of growth. Interesting that cinematography comes up again. Exercise physiology, education, logistics, business analytics, fine arts studio, interior design, aviation, tech, and neuroscience. So undergraduates continue to be a pretty eclectic group. I was trying to find a pattern in here when I was looking at it, and I couldn't find anything. So there's obviously cybersecurity is hot. There's some very practical kind of business-oriented things here. Again, cyber logistics, business analytics, but there are also some more creative elements represented in terms of fine arts and interior design. So really a little bit of everything. Now, let's see which of those things get jobs. First, let's take a look at US job postings by month, and this is for bachelor's and above. Again, if you're interested in the 2 years and below, we do that separate webinar, and be glad to share the charts with you. Where we are in August is down 20% in job postings. Now, before we all jump out of our chairs, that's actually not bad. Last year is a huge spike in demand as we bounced out of COVID. And now we're starting to see the job postings return to more normal levels. But if we compare this month, August, to the last month pre-COVID, March 2020, you can see we're still substantially up from where we were then. So we're 88% higher actually this month than we were in March 2020. So still very, very strong job postings. And I found it interesting that they're up 7.6%. Now, it's a mixed bag in terms of all of our financials, because if the jobs don't tone down, the Federal Reserve is going to keep raising interest rates, and our retirement portfolios are all going to get hammered. But for those of you who are in the job market, this is very good news. And for your graduates, it's very good news. Now, registered nursing had the highest volume of job postings. Though those job postings have been trending down recently, actually, it's still enormous and a huge shortage. Then we have something I haven't seen very often in our data, but tax preparers are cropping up in several charts you'll see. So it must be hiring season for the folks who are going to do our taxes next year. Then we have software developers, engineers, pharmacists, and a string of managers, manager other, general and operations managers, information technology project managers, and marketing managers. Last but not least, we got computer systems engineers and architects coming in the top 10 for August job postings. What's growing? Well, interestingly, not a lot. You'll notice that after the first 4 here, even our fastest growing programs are negative. So that breakpoint comes at nurse practitioner, which is essentially flat, down 1%. That means every other program declined. So what's going on is very similar to what I talked about a moment ago. We had a huge spike last year, and now we're coming down to more normal levels. And so the year-over-year numbers are depressed, if you will. There's a decline for almost every program in the United States. Excuse me, every occupation code in the United States. But the levels of demand overall are still pretty healthy. across all these things, and hopefully they'll stay that way. And again, you see tax preparers just skyrocketing here. Who knows why? Non-degree courses. Many of you are worried about this, trying to find short courses and certificates for your folks. The way we keep track of that is to look what people are taking on Coursera. So in terms of courses offered, business leads the pack on Coursera, followed by computer science. If we were looking at Udemy, by the way, the rest of the list would be pretty different. It skews very heavily towards information technology, computer science, and software. So here we have a bit more diverse list. We have life sciences, certainly data science, physical science and engineering, social sciences, arts and humanities, information tech, language learning, personal development, math and logic. Now I emphasize language learning because this is one of those places I go, and I'm always surprised to find that despite the decline on almost every campus in the United States in your language program, it continues to be a popular subject on Coursera. So I think it's one of the things where the venue may be changing from sort of a traditional academic thing you learn to something you learn on the side, online. Now, let's look at the enrollment in these programs. And we're looking at this now by 2-digit zip code. So we sort of map this back to traditional academic program structures. First is business and business management, not surprising, biggest program. Nursing's not on here for obvious reasons. A little tough to do that virtually. And by the way, none of it would be accepted by the nursing accreditors or the licensing exams. So you're not going to see that on this list. Computer and information science is number 2. Multidisciplinary studies, then liberal arts. Encouraged to see that still strongly enrolled. Mathematics and statistics. Visual and performing arts I found interesting to find. It was such high ranking on an online course, but I suppose in all photography and other online media, online's a pretty good way to learn it. Health professions, then English language and literature, physical science and engineering. Now, as you look at these numbers, 42.5 million people who signed up for business marketing management, that's not this year. We'll come to this year in a moment. This is actually since the inception of these courses at Coursera. So while it gives you a sense of long-term trend, don't make the mistake of thinking that there are 42 million people taking that right now. That's over the last 10 or 12 years of Coursera's history. What we do is we've been tracking their numbers for some time, so we can pull out and see how many people, how much that number went up essentially over the trailing 12 months. And that allows us to understand which programs are seeing the highest enrollment now. Business is still on the top of the list. Computer and information services, number 2. And here at liberal arts, I found very interesting. 2.5 million people enrolled in liberal arts courses online at Coursera last year alone. Visual and performing arts, actually, number 4. English, number 5. So, and then we see foreign languages a little bit further down our list. So there's a lot of interest actually in these less career-oriented courses and certificates. So well worth keeping in mind that I think we're looking at often adult learners. Sometimes we're looking at overseas students who want to, for example, improve their English. I think that's part of what's going on here if you dug into the individual courses. But a lot of interest in things that are fading a little bit on campus, but still very strong online. Of course, when we turn to Udemy, it gets a little more practical and more technology focused. And here we're looking at the skills that Udemy teaches, and then comparing those to the job postings, the requirements for the same topic. So this on the left-hand side, you can see Agile Scrum Management, so a project management course. And some of the things they wanted there were Agile A to Z, what they taught. I mean, say Scrum, Agile Project Management, PSM certification, Kanban leadership, negotiation, and productivity. Now let's look to the right, and you'll see Scrum is there, problem solving, general methodologies, Agile, and project management. So the course content over here on the left is pretty tightly aligned with what the job market wants. We're exploring that to see to what extent we can look at things like syllabi to understand whether the things desired in the job market are actually being taught. As far as I can tell, the syllabi aren't descriptive enough to really know the answer to that. But it's something to keep in mind as you go forward, to be able to do this back and forth between what the job market wants and what you're teaching, to make sure that you're staying in alignment. Doesn't mean you have to teach the exact same things, but you're going to want to get good coverage, especially in these areas that are pretty job oriented, like coding. And finally, let's look at the program of the month. So what we're going to do here is walk around the market side of it, and then we're actually going to touch on margins as well. So in the market, we're going to look at student demand, employment, competition, and degree fit. Then we'll turn to margins. So when we do this, what we suggest is to rank all your programs. In fact, we rank all programs in the US, 1,400 IPEDS programs. And we do that because that allows you to understand not just whether this is a good program, but whether it's the best program you might choose. In a sense, how does it stack up against all the other options you have? Marketing management actually does pretty well. You can see here the total percentiles, the 99th percentile. So that's one of the top 14 programs out of the 1,400 programs we keep track of. Student demand, 99th percentile. Employment, 84th percentile, which is good, but not spectacular. And then you see the problem, competitive intensity, 3rd percentile, and that's pink, not good. Let me take a moment on the colors. When we color code charts, we use dark green for the best, the highest. I should say the best numbers, because sometimes the highest numbers are not good. So a lot of competition, for example, is not good. And then we run it down to pink for things that are below the 40th percentile. So simply put, you can think of green as good, pink is bad. Now, in terms of student demand, this one's a very large program. Google search volumes are at the 97th percentile, almost 500,000 searches in the prior period. That's the prior 3 months. International, also 97th percentile. New student enrollment volume is at the 99th percentile, with 13,000 new students enrolled in the last 12 months. Then we start to split it up between on-ground and online. Here we're looking at completions. So if you think about it, we're really working our way down the funnel. Google search is actually looking at what people are going to do in a few months when they actually enroll in school. Then we get to enrollment, which obviously is, when they get to campus. So that's a little bit historical, but actually updated 3 times a year. So it's quite current. Completions are a different ball of wax entirely because they're issued by IPEDS. The most recent data just came out for 2021. And so we're looking at the best it's 2021, but then when you think about it and say, wait a second, a person chose what program to go into 4 to 6 years before they graduated. So in terms of what students want, completions represent what they wanted back in 2015. So it's quite out of date, but we keep the data because it's very comprehensive. It is precisely correct for what it does. Well, generally correct. We have to go in and do some adjustments to it in order to get it back. There are folks who file the same, different schools file the same program in different places. We do some corrections for that. But it's very, very accurate compared to most sources. It covers all programs, all institutions. So it's a very comprehensive way of looking at the market. Then we also here can look at online completions by in-market students. And there are some 3,000 of those. And that's 99th percentile as well. Let me take a moment on that too, because this is one of the biggest corrections we do. IPEDS actually reports all those online students in the headquarters location of the institution. So 30,000 University of Phoenix students, the completions show up in Phoenix. Well, 95% of those students are not in Phoenix. They're scattered all over the country, many of them in Southern California in particular. So what we do is we use the NC-SARA information that shows you where students are enrolled by institution to allocate those people back to the markets in which they actually exist. So we take those students out of Phoenix, for example, and put some of them back in Southern California. Now let's return to the program itself. Growth here is really very attractive. 99th percentile in unit growth of Google searches, 99th percentile in terms of enrollment, even 99th percentile on completion volume change. The percentages are a little bit lower, but the volumes for this particular program are very high. And obviously the percentage are lower because it's a very big program. So it's an important illustration that you don't always want to go after the highest percentage growth because the growth here is actually bigger than most programs because the underlying base is so large. Now, let's take a look at employment. And here we start with job postings. We cover the country on these. We're tracking the trailing 12 months, 599,000, really 600,000 if you round off, jobs for marketing managers in the last 12 months, job postings. BLS folks currently employed, 1.8 million. Both of those are 98th and 99th, above the 98th percentile. Then let's go look at job postings in the last 12 months, what we call ACS bachelor's outcomes. Now, I can hear all of you going, what the heck is that? And let me come down to the bottom here and explain. Of the folks who take marketing, only 23% of them are going to end up in jobs for which they're directly prepared. So 77% are going to go do something else. In direct prep, we capture using the NCS crosswalk as adjusted by us, the folks who do what they're directly prepared to do. So marketing folks who go into work for ad agencies and marketing. But as I mentioned, a whole bunch of folks are going to go do something else. You can see when we add back all the something else as they go do, it's almost 219,000 additional jobs. It's a 50% increase over the baseline, a little bit less than that. So if you don't include those, non-direct prep jobs, you're really missing a great deal. 80% of programs, fewer than 20% of the graduates are going to go in the fields for which they're directly prepared. So if you want to simplify it, 80% of your graduates are not going to do what they're told to do. They're not going to go into the things that they prepared for. And so when you look at the data, be very, very careful. Most people are reporting direct prep, and that is a very significant understatement of the job opportunities for your graduates, especially in the liberal arts. Job postings for bachelor's in marketing, down 30%. Not as robust as we saw in our previous examples. We're still up 51% since COVID, but we've been trending down for 6 straight months. And I think we're going to end up trending back down until we get to, roughly pre-COVID levels, but that hasn't happened yet. Now, what do people want in job postings? Turns out they're fundamentally 2 things: product managers and salespeople. So you can see at the top in terms of job postings with product manager, we have store manager and senior product manager. Then we see a string of sales roles: account executive, business development manager, sales rep, inside sales rep, sales account executive, and outside sales rep. So when you think about what a student really needs to know here, if they want to go into marketing, a lot of them need to know how to sell. And then on the other side, they need to know how to manage marketing activities. What skills are people looking for? Not surprisingly, several of these are also sales-oriented: outside sales, account management, and inside sales. And I should have colored business development green because that's also a sales skill. Then predictably, we get the product management things we saw over here in terms of what people are looking for: product management, project management, product development, merchandising, product marketing, and advertising. Now, it's a great program in terms of employment. It's a great program in terms of student demand, but regrettably, we're not the first people to figure that out. So there's some 705 campuses in the United States that offer this program. That puts it in the top 2% in terms of number of institutions offering the program. So very, very, very competitive. How many campuses have been added or dropped? We've got 4 more people who entered this space, and institutions with online in-market students, so online offerings, 119. Now, the way I start to look at this to understand, okay, it's big, all big programs are competitive. The question is it saturated? So when I start by looking at average program completions, that tells me this is a pretty big program. Median is a better number, 25 completions a year. To think about that in terms of number of students are in this program at the institution, multiply that about 6. That accounts for 4 years of education plus some attrition. So that's a program with 150 people in it. Pretty good size, but I can see the median program completions are starting to drop. That worries me because that means that people are in the market offering this program are starting to see some decline in enrollment. And indeed, we see a 4% change. And then I start to say, okay, now there's some other metrics for competitive intensity. How much does it cost to buy a Google click if you advertise for this particular program? That's at the 90th percentile with $17 a click. Now just think about that for a moment. I pay $17 to get a click, and no more than 1 in 100 of those clicks are going to actually convert to a student. So that's $1,700 in cost per student before they even show up on campus. The Google Competition Index actually is about average for this index, which goes between 0 and 1. But for the education industry, it's at the 66th percentile. So it's starting to get up there in terms of competitiveness. And a little bit online, I found interesting. If you look at, there are 16% of institutions offer this online, but so far only 7% of the completions are online. So this program really hasn't transitioned from on-ground to online for some reason. The vast majority of interest here is actually in an on-ground modality. Now, what level of degree do you want to offer here? 87% of the completions are at the bachelor's level. So really it's basically a bachelor's level program from an academic standpoint. And you can see nationally that's true. And in terms of enrollment, drops a little bit to 84%. Then you say, okay, well, that's what people, the degree they get, but what gets hired and what do employers want? And I found this very interesting because we got 55% bachelor's and above, 56%, 55, excuse me. Predominantly bachelor's, but only 44%, 10% master's. Keep in mind that many of those master's degrees that are held by people in marketing are probably MBAs, not marketing management masters. What surprised me here was really the high percentage of folks with very little academic training in the space. So 16% with no college, 20%, 1% with some, and 8% with an associate's degree. So what are the demographics of this program? And let me step back here. When we're making program decisions, in our experience, folks generally aren't taking into account the likely demographic makeup of that program. But every program has its unique demographic characteristics. And so when you're making program decisions, you are actually dictating or heavily influencing the demographic makeup of your campus for the next 5 or 10 years. As you all know, nursing is still, for whatever reason, 85 to 90% female. So if you increase nursing or healthcare, you're going to increase the number of women on campus. If you do engineering, number of men, particularly whites and Asians. So as we look at this particular program, it skews white. It's 53% female, 47% male. So that's actually closer than most. Right now at the US, it's 60% female, 40% male. This is pretty evenly balanced between the two. And we see a pretty healthy group of Latinos, well below average in terms of national representation at 6% for Blacks, international 5%, Asian 5%, and you can see the others. So we're still underrepresented, I think, in terms of overall minority populations. This is really whiter than the population of the country as a whole. So that really leaves you two choices. Either you de-emphasize this and emphasize something else where you're going to pick up more diversity, or you start to educate minority students about why this is a program that may be of interest to them. We bring all that together for you in a scorecard, and we think this one-page summary is very important because as you're trying to make these decisions, you really don't want to be thumbing through 50 pages of documents, switching from system to system to try and find the data you need. So we put it all on one page so that a manager or a provost trying to understand how healthy this program is can get that information at a glance. In fact, if you just look at the colors, you get most of the story. Overall, very good. Why? Student demand is dark green. Employment is okay, it's blue. Competition is the issue, it's pink. So without even diving into the data, you can very quickly get a sense of where the issues are. And again, you can see student demand is just great overall. Growth is a worrisome part on employment. So again, in seconds, you can really see what's going on and understand the relative attractiveness of a program. Of course, there's one other dimension. We covered markets, but you're at least going to want to look at the margins on the program before you make any program decisions. Here, we look at direct instructional margins. So we take gross tuition and fees, We subtract scholarships. That gets us to net revenue. And then we subtract what I'll call direct instructional cost. That's the actual cost of teaching the courses in this program. So what's not included? President's salary, buildings, food, all what I would consider overhead functions are not added into here. Why? Because they're not going to change when you make a program decision. So it's not that they're not important, and we certainly can and do calculate them. But when you're making program decisions, you want to be looking at direct instructional cost and program contribution. There is an exception to that, by the way, which is if you're thinking about program pricing, you do need to understand your total cost structure. So what does marketing look like from an economic standpoint? Well, on average, $299 per student credit hour. This is for a particular institution. $72 in discounts. And I should say it is not actual data from an institution. It's been disguised. And then state appropriations of $117. This is obviously, it would be true only if you're a public institution. That gets you over to net revenue. And then you take out the instructional cost and you get to a contribution of about 57%. Now, all that's difficult to interpret unless you know how other programs are doing. So what we do over here is percentile the performance of this program relative to all other programs at that particular institution. So here we can see that gross revenue numbers actually relatively low for student credit hour at 14%. Discounts are actually high. So now we get a low revenue plus a high discount gets us to low net revenue at the 25th percentile. Fortunately for the program, the instructional cost is relatively low at the 27th percentile. So it managed to work its way back up to average overall for contribution. How's that been changing? Well, gross revenue has been going up a little bit. Discounts have been all over the place. Net revenue as a result, fairly flat. Instructional costs last year in particular came down sharply. So you can see this U, the margins were going down and that improved significantly in 2021. If we want to then go one more step and say, okay, that's what our cost structure looks like and our margins, but how does that compare to other institutions for the same program? And here we can break it all the way down to look at the course level within that program and compare it to a benchmark database that now includes several thousand programs across some 30 institutions. And what you can see is it's pretty tight grouping here for 100 level courses in the benchmark. But the client is both higher than those, and importantly, the whiskers are further apart, meaning that it has less control over the cost of its courses in that program. So there's just a lot of variability. Chances are that means they're not paying close enough attention to course size, and they may need to be looking at that and offering fewer of those entry-level courses. 200 and 300 levels, pretty much in line. The client's right around about the same. And notice how tight the distribution is on the cost for that particular one. So here we're managing it pretty well. Then we get to the 400s. You can see now the bars are starting to widen for the benchmark. And that's because as you get to 400 levels, you're going to see more small classes. The client, however, is seeing a lot of small classes, and they're well above the benchmark at the 400 level and also seeing a lot of range here. So not very tightly controlled. 500 and 600. The clients again above with a ton of variability at this point. Not so surprising. Here you really are going to end up with small courses. And I'm not sure it isn't inevitable, but certainly is one of the things you want to keep an eye on if you're trying to manage your cost. Overall, we can see the sample, the benchmark is at 134. This client's at 177, and it's costing them $850,000 a year in incremental expense. If they went to go fix that, a good deal of money is going to be down here at the 100s because while it's a relatively small difference, a lot of students in those levels. And then you got to go look at the 400 and 600 level for the remainder of the cost. So to summarize, we had good news. In August, US Google searches for academic programs increased 10% year over year. In spring 22, cybersecurity had the fastest year over year bachelor's degree enrollment growth, and at the master's level, data science was the fastest. Registered nurses and tax preparers had the highest volume of job postings for bachelor's and above graduates. And tax preparers grew the fastest year over year. Who knows why? And finally, demand for marketing programs at the bachelor's level is high, Student demand is really good. Jobs per graduate are high. Wages are okay. And margin per student credit hour is average. So that's my presentation. Want to encourage all of you to join us again next month. For those of you maybe at a community college, we'll be doing the update on community colleges on Wednesday, October 26th at 2 p.m. For the four-year colleges, bachelor's and above, we'll be doing that on October 27th at 2 p.m. And in the meantime, I encourage all of you to read my book. It'll give you a very good systematic structure for how to evaluate programs, what data you need, what analytics you need to perform in that data, what's the right process, and how do you bring all that together in an organized way. And it's a pretty short read actually as well. So encourage you to go get that on Amazon, and that's all I have for the month. And now we're going to open it up so all of you can actually ask us for individual programs you'd like to have us look at. And Winnell Auriac is here, and he'll actually run you through those programs so you can see the data for them in real time. Now we're going to do that at the national level, candidly, because if we did it at the state level, the system's so slow, you'd all leave. But we can really look at any program you want at the national level.
Yeah, well, now we do have a request for political science, and we have another request for cybersecurity.
Okay, 1 second here.
So when I was going to share a screen, I can tell you what cybersecurity says though in advance without looking at the chart. Demand is terrific. Employment is terrific. Wages are high. Competition is rapidly increasing. But, I always caution my clients, wait a second here, make sure you actually look at the data, because I may be wrong. And those, especially the student demand side, can change very quickly. You can start anytime you want, but in the meantime, that is an important part when you think about program evaluation, is how often do you need to do it? And the answer is that the frequency of program evaluation varies with the particular type of data you're looking at. So student demand can be very volatile. Fortunately, the data comes out very frequently. So it's easy to look at it and say, okay, I've got a cybersecurity program. Am I likely going to need to add sections next year? If the demand is still rising 50% per year, then the answer is probably yes. But that could change on a dime. And we've seen a big spike, for example, in public health during the pandemic. It's now starting to taper off. So you wouldn't want to launch a program into one of those bumps unless you felt it was going to endure. On the other hand, though, if you have the program, if you're following it and you're managing you're looking at your portfolio regularly, you can decide that to grow that program, perhaps to invest in marketing for it, so that you can take advantage of that trend, if you will, in student demand while it's still there. You ready to go?
Yeah, I am. I just need permission to share my screen. If you could,
I didn't know that.
We will get rolling here.
Sure.
Now, for something like political science, and I will open up cybersecurity shortly here. But for political science, Bob slightly alluded to this during his presentation about kind of reporting, it's 6-digit versus 4-digit. Political science does have a family of programs. So keep in mind, we do want to consider that there are other zip codes that could be relevant here. But I'm going to go ahead and dive into this very specific 45 or the more general 451001 political science general. As you can see, the system is designed to give you that macro level view of the program's performance in the market. Before I even open up the scorecard or those details that Bob walked through, I do expect to see a lot of student interest in relation to all other programs, as well as some pretty strong metrics here around employment percentile, where we see the competitive intensity percentile come in. We're definitely going to have some questions about what's triggering this to be interpreted as a very competitive program in the national market. We're going to go ahead and open up the scorecard, and then the details will populate here. Starting at the top left here for political science, what are some of the details that are driving this 97th percentile student demand performance? We're going to see something like
this looks just like the marketing program I just looked at, right? Dark green for student demand, okay for employment, and now we got to look at competition, right? It's very easy to sort of get an understanding of what the topics are here just by looking at the colors. Go ahead.
And the color coders the color coding will indicate for you what you should maybe be paying more attention to, right? Right here, we're seeing a lot of dark greens in the size metrics related to student demand, which means, Google search volumes are large, enrollment volumes are large, international page views, on-ground, online, and some of on-ground and online completions are all large. And when I say large, right, I'm using data to say that, where we can see that compared to all other programs, we're going to be able to rank how the individual metrics are performing compared to all other programs in a market. So we can see something like on-ground completions in market, this value of 45,000 is actually a 98th percentile value, meaning this is going to be one of the larger programs completing on ground, as well as some of on ground and online. The only questions that there might be here are in the pinks, where we see somewhat of a overall decreasing trend here for Google search change in units. A drop of 4,900, right, is actually a first percentile drop, meaning it's one of the most significant absolute values here for drops. But then we're also going to give you the change percentage, right, so that we can see that although the unit is so significant, the change in percentage is not so drastic here at a drop of 7%, right, meaning that this is just a very large program that has a lot of search volumes. So the high amount of units is not as concerning as it may look. Right, so student demand is strong here.
Well, I'd actually say, you know, Winnell, this would, to me, would be one of those early warning signals. Google search is the closest we have to a canary in the coal mine to tell you when something's going wrong and when you may want to look at an enrollment. You may want to check your own enrollment and see whether you might need to make adjustments in the coming semester. Because I mentioned Google search is when people are still thinking about what they want to do. So it's the if you will, the most leading edge indicator we have. Enrollment is, you know, here and now, what's happening. And so that is still stable, even up. And then completion volume really represents, as I mentioned, something that happened 6 years ago. So this would be a warning signal to me. Doesn't mean I'd do anything, but if this came out this way a couple months in a row, I'd be very worried. And I'd start to look at what's happening in my own enrollment pipeline and just make sure that I make any adjustments I need to make if it's starting to trend down in my school.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we do have the ability to actually dive into the specific Google search volumes that are being searched for. And, you know, we can see the trends all the way down to the individual details. So if there's one type of search volume that's decreasing more than another, we're going to be able to identify what that might be as well. So there's a lot of different things that we can do with that number there. So student demand, all in all, looks relatively okay here, right? And then we're going to look at the employment data here on the right. And immediately what strikes to me is actually this wage data here for mean wages at 95,000, which is actually a 90th percentile BLS mean wage. And then we're going to see a pretty big difference here in terms of the wages at the mean for someone working in a field directly related to this versus the wages at the mean for someone who reported this completion at the bachelor's level and then went on to work on a different field. We can see $124,000 here. So pretty interesting.
This one really supports my point about be very careful with direct prep job analysis. 0% of political science graduates go into direct prep fields. So that when you see that job postings of 98 at the very top, that's a very scary number for a program with 46,000 completions. But they're not going to go into that. They're going to go into a variety of other fields, typically hundreds of fields that are not accounted for in direct prep. And there are plenty of jobs in the fields that these folks go into. And as Winnell pointed out, they're going to make a good wage. They're going to be at they're going to make $125,000 mid-career, which is actually the 87th percentile wage in the United States. So being political pays, but not in politics, because that's not what these folks are going to do.
And we see that here in the overall counts for jobs through that ACS outcome. We're looking at about 164,000 jobs. But when we're looking at the direct prep, we're not seeing as many job postings being pulled in here. And then just quickly want to highlight, you know, the educational attainment for the jobs that are being pulled in here seem to be asking for a mix here of master's as well as doctoral degrees. And then the competition, right? 1,191 campuses with graduates. This is a very large amount of campuses with graduates. Again, 99th percentile. So a lot of folks in this field for sure. We see an average program completion of 39 mixed with a median program completion of 15 here. And then this program doesn't really seem to be completing at a high percentage here online fully. Also here is what we see.
Yeah, it's a pretty much on-ground program still.
Cool. Then I know we
Now we
had,
have another program that people would like to see when you get a chance. And it says, given the demand for pilots, what is the demand for aeronautics programs?
oh yeah, and I actually got that zip code. It's 4901. Well, let's go into cybersecurity here really quickly.
While you're pulling up the data, there's a really good question that was asked by an anonymous attendee, that if you don't use direct prep alignment, then how do you validate that alignment being used as representative in your area, where you're studying? There is an answer to that. First, the core data source is the American Community Survey. And in the American Community Survey, they ask people, what was your undergraduate major? What are you doing now? How much money do you make? So it's a very authoritative source of information on what people do. You can cut that by state. It's a bit of a labor of love. I don't think you can go much below that and still have statistically reliable data. That's really the source for the information when we go to those non-direct prep jobs that we call the ACS outcomes, is the American Community Survey, part of the census, very comprehensive, a couple million responses in there. So it's a good way of doing it, and it can be localized up to a point.
Mhm. I also just want to quickly highlight, I'm going to dive into cybersecurity, and I'm focusing in on the one related to kind of computer science, but there is also an aspect here in the 43s for kind of cyber computer forensics and cybersecurity defense strategy. I'm assuming we're looking at this one, and this one we're curious about, so I'm going to look into this one instead. But to what Bob mentioned here, right, very strong student demand, both size and growth metrics we're finding here, no surprise at all. And then we're seeing very strong direct prep employment numbers for this field, as well as ACS bachelor's outcomes. Relatively strong mean wages for direct prep, as well as for that ACS or American Community Survey reporting. And then it's pretty interesting here to see 38% of folks who major in cybersecurity at the bachelor's level end up working in this field. This is actually going to be one of the programs that has a stronger relationship with direct prep employment. We're going to see that percentage translated here into a 93rd percentile, meaning it's going to be one of the higher ones here compared to all other programs. We see a relatively even mix here across award levels for this program. 24% certificate, 14% associates, 29% bachelors, and 26% masters. Keep in mind, our system does have the ability to dive into the competitors tab and identify growth trends year over year or across the 5-year by award level, which is a way that some of our clients leverage the competitors tab to identify what award levels are growing or decreasing over time. You know, if you're thinking about offering this program as a new program, the appropriate award level would probably be one of the questions you want to answer as well. So demand is strong, employment is strong. You know, we have some answers on what the appropriate award level for this program is. The employment market looks like it's really demanding for that 46% bachelor's degree. And then we see a lot of other folks in this field as well, 585 campuses with graduates at the 97th percentile. And look how strongly online this program tends to complete. 42% of all completions here are happening online, and this is going to be a 92nd percentile percentage, meaning compared to all other programs, this is going to be one of the programs that show a little bit more of an online viability.
Yeah, an interesting point there too. Only 21% of the institutions offer it online, but they've got 42% of the completions.
Mhm.
So if you will, online is taking a disproportionate share relative to the number of institutions that offer it. Wages aren't so great here. I'm a little surprised. I suspect those are going to be going up given the shortage that we have of folks that can do this. But we're only looking at $88,000 a year at the 30 to 60 range, which is just barely average. As I say, I'm a little surprised to see the wages are so low.
And we see aviation, airway management, airline, commercial,
I
professional,
think I was looking for pilot.
aviation science, flight instructor, airline flight attendant. So a lot of overlap. I think it was for,
I think they're interested in pilots. So that one, O2 is the one I think he wants to see.
And we also have a comment from Maureen Becker, who says that she actually has an aviation management program for both the bachelor's and master's level, as well as a Federal Aviation Administration's aircraft dispatcher certification. And she says that there are numerous job opportunities. She's
Sure
from
there
York
are.
College, and they're the only City University of New York campus that offers the major.
Anything you can do to get the flights from LaGuardia to go off on time is very, very helpful.
Cool. Yeah, so all I'm doing is I wanted to see if I could get City University of New York to show up in the scorecard because my fears have turned into reality here with this zip code, which are, again, there's just going to be a lot of overlap with the zip code. So just keep in mind that when we're diving into a very specific zip code, you know, there could be other zip codes that we might want to consider when reviewing the program just to get the true understanding of competition. I'm not sure what zip code is being used to report this program out of that institution. Maybe I just
But look at it, you know, this is not terrible. 85th percentile in terms of Google search volume. So a fair amount of interest. New student enrollment, 90th percentile at almost 2,000 new students enrolled. Completions a little bit lower, 2,000. And then look at the jump in Google search volumes year over year. Up at the 96th percentile, almost 25,000 increase, which is a 40% jump in Google search. So I think you could say that, you know, this may be getting hotter as we go forward. Note that the enrollment change is not positive. So we're getting a mixed story here in terms of what the growth potential is, but it's pretty big. Job postings, as you know, from what you said, pretty high. And if I go down here and look at job postings per graduate, I've got 7 jobs for every graduate. So labor market's getting a little tight there. And then good wages. And most people, 26% of the folks who get this degree actually end up doing something in a related field. And unlike our others, they're only yellow on competition. Only 98 schools, so many fewer competitors than we've seen, but also pretty small programs. 10 completes per year as a median. So that would be very tough to run and not have to subsidize it pretty heavily. Last I knew, I mean, there's a client we had that had an aviation program. They're spending $100,000 a year on gasoline for all the test flights.
And we see some online completions. I don't know how comfortable I feel about hopping on a plane with someone who learned how to fly it online, but it is possible, is what this data
So
is.
remember, that's how all your Navy pilots learn. Right? They obviously fly jets too, but most of their training is done in a simulator.
Then we have a question for geography 450701. And then more of a specific question wasn't about the GIS. So keep in mind that is its own zip code as well, but I'm going to look at geography general just to start. But what is the demand for geography graduates? GIS analysts were high in demand, but not so sure now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually opening up this scorecard for geography as a whole. You know, we could also then shift and look at the GIS specific zip code as well. But keep in mind, we're going to want to consider the overlap. But then also, we're going to see something like a job postings total here, 4,100. We do have the ability to go into our job postings data and filter by something like the skill of GIS and identify trend lines over time for GIS so that we can prove or disprove whether.
Now, contrast this with the one we were just looking at with 7 jobs per graduate. Here we have 0.8 jobs per graduate. So the demand relative to the supply, that is the number of graduates, is not great for this particular one. Let's look at the GIS one I think you're bringing up now.
Yep.
Yeah, a little bit better, 2.4, but still that's only just average. I've been surprised by this. You'd think it'd be booming given all the increase in drones and all the different things you can do with them to keep track of geography and data, but not, and look at the pay, it's really quite bad. So it's a logical program. I understand why you're looking at it, but not, you know, I got 2 reds here, red or pinks, employment and competition. Wages are not great. The number of jobs is above average, but not wonderful. And that jobs per graduate is, 60th percentile stuff. So really, if I were thinking about this, it depends if I have the program or I'm thinking of getting into it. If I have it, it's probably viable. If I don't have it, I'm not sure I'd get in, because then I've got to, I'm going to be facing a fairly tough market to be successful in. It's one where if you're already in, you can probably make a go of it, but I wouldn't. There are many, many better choices if you're thinking about a new program.
Yep.
I think our time is up. Let's see. Any questions?
Yeah, I'll stop
If
sharing.
you all would like to look at any other programs, we'd be glad to do that. Not right now, but let us know and we can schedule some time with Manel. You can come on in and he'll share some information with you, albeit at the national level. And if you have any general questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of us really, and we'd be glad to answer them and help you out. So
Thank
that's
you
it
all
for
for
today.
joining.
Thank you very much.